Welcome to this session of the Islamic History and Thought lecture series organized by the Institute of Ismaili Studies. As its title says, the lecture series welcomes scholarly talks and discussions in various fields of Islamic studies related to the broad research interests of the Institute. The announcements of lectures can be found on at the website of the Institute of Ismaili Studies, and are also advertised through the academic mailing lists. So please subscribe to the IES newsletter if you're interested in these and other events at the Institute and want to receive timely information. My name is Orkhan Mir-Kasimov. I'm Associate Professor at the Institute of Ismaili Studies. And it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. David Hollenberg. David Hollenberg is Associate Professor of Arabic and Islamic Studies at the University of Oregon. He has extensively published on Ismaili doctrinal literature and the preservation of the Zaidi manuscript tradition. He is currently completing a critical edition and study of the Nusayri author, Ismat al-Dawla, the work titled The Path of Knowledge and Clarification and the Bliss of Listening and Seeing, with Mushaga Satrian to be published by Brill Academic Publishers. The topic of Dr. Hollenberg's talk today is Between Zulaykha and Joseph, Shi'i Allegoresis of Surat Yusuf. So before I hand it over to Dr. Hollenberg, I would like to commemorate a date that is significant for the Institute of Ismaili Studies and for the community of scholars in Islamic studies in general. Today is 9th of May. 1 year ago, on this day, we lost our prominent colleague, Professor Wilfred Madelung. I would just like to take a moment to mark this date and to remember the much missed presence of Professor Madelung, whose human qualities and immense knowledge influenced and nurtured several generations of scholars in various fields of Islamic studies.
Thank you so much, Orkhan, for the introduction. And I was asked to share my thoughts about Professor Madelung, and I thought I'd start out by saying, because I imagine a lot of the audience are quite young, and I'm quite old, that when I first met Madelung, I was just a graduate student. It was the year 2000, and I'll never forget, because even though I knew Professor Madelung was not of the same generation as someone like Goldziher or Schacht or these people, in my mind, he was categorized in that category because of his eminence and his erudition and his just staggering learning. And he'd been publishing since the late 50s. So I had a year at Oxford at the Oriental Institute as a non-matriculating PhD student. And I'll never forget, I reached out to him, of course. And when I got an email from Wilfred Madelung in my inbox, it was almost otherworldly for me. I mean, just the sort of, I share that just as some indication of the kind of awe that he held for us in that of my generation. The image I'm sharing here is Professor Madelung while we were both at the same time in Sana'a in Yemen. This is at the Imam Zayd ibn Ali Cultural Foundation. Professor Madelung came on a sort of, with Sabina Schmidtke and a couple of other people to look at manuscripts from the Imam Zayd ibn Ali Cultural Foundation and the Great Mosque in Sana'a and get copies of manuscripts. And so we had a few days together. Here he is sort of sharing notes with a traditional Zaydi scholar. So while on this, just to give you some indication of this person's skills, at the last minute, when the cultural foundation in Yemen, and the German embassy found out that Professor Madeleine was in Sana'a, they asked him if he would give a talk, since it had been 50 years since he published his work on Zaydism, or 50 years, maybe 30 years, must have been 40 years. Let's see, 50. No, 50 years. It was 1950, his dissertation. Yeah. So in any case, this was in 2010, right? Or 1960, maybe. Yeah. Sorry, I don't have the date handy. But in any case, he gave this talk in perfect modern standard Arabic, off the cuff, for about an hour without any notes. So this was not something he prepared. He was just able to speak to this. And it was quite something to behold. Yeah, I mean, I sort of, in my intro to Islam class, I have a little lecture on Hadith scholarship. And there's a quote by al-Qadi Ayad that when a great scholar dies, there's a gap that opens up in heaven until in the firmament, until another scholar of equal erudition takes that scholar's place. And I think we could all safely say that there will be a gap in the firmament for a long, long time to come. They don't make them like him. So yeah, as Orkhan mentioned in my talk today, I called Between Yusuf and Zulaykha, Shi'i Allegoresis of Surat Yusuf. Really, what I'm going to be doing is comparing two different sources. And I'll talk about this active comparison a little bit. This is sort of one of these sources is a text that I know from my days of writing my dissertation, actually, in my book, the Kitab al-fara'id wa-hudud, and this is just a page of the manuscript, which was copied in 1900. This manuscript is the property of the Institute of Ismaili Studies, number 520. And the second is this book that I've been working on with Mushik Asatrian for quite some time, Isbit Adalba's Manhaj al-Ilm al-Bayan. This is a page from that manuscript. And happily, this book is now in process of publication. So it'll be out in August, and we've been working on it for over 4 years. It's a 450-page major treatise, so we're very excited about that. So I will begin. I am to be reading and then commenting as I go a little bit. The story of Joseph was imagined in a great variety of narrative forms, from antiquity to the Middle Ages to the present. It is at once the story of filial strife, deceit, patience with wrongdoing, and reconciliation. And it is the story of desire and forbearance, self-control, loyalty, and trust in God. It is truly, as the Qur'an declares, ahsan al-qasas, the best of narration. The Quranic account may be summarized as follows. The youngest son of the prophet Jacob, Joseph, possesses unique beauty and wisdom. He receives prophetic dreams, foretelling his special status. He is the most beloved of Jacob's 12 sons. Jacob's affection for Joseph inspires the jealousy of his 11 older brothers. They plot against him and eventually abandon him at a well. They bring to their father Jacob Joseph's bloodied shirt, claiming that he'd been killed by a wolf. Joseph is found by a group of merchants who seize and then sell him as a slave to a high-ranking official in Egypt, referred to in the Qur'an as al-Aziz. In the household of al-Aziz, Joseph grows and continues to develop his knowledge and wisdom. Al-Aziz's wife, identified by tradition as Zulaykha, is attracted to Joseph, who is now a preternaturally gorgeous grown man. She attempts to seduce him, but although attracted to her, Joseph remains steadfast in his faith and resists her advances. When she is mocked by the women of the city for her infatuation, Zulaykha invites them for a banquet. And they, astounded by Joseph's beauty when he comes forth, cut their hands with the knives they were holding. After she pursues Joseph bodily, ripping his shirt from behind, she accuses him of initiating the encounter, and Joseph is imprisoned. When the Pharaoh has a dream that his advisors cannot interpret, he summons Joseph, who has a reputation for dream interpretation. And Joseph explains that the dream prophesizes a severe famine that would affect the land for 7 years. Impressed by his wisdom, the pharaoh appoints Joseph to manage the food storage and distribution for his kingdom. The famine eventually reaches as far as Canaan, and Jacob sends Joseph's brothers to Egypt seeking food. Many years had passed since they had left Joseph to die in the well, and they did not recognize him when they had an audience before him in his capacity as the high-ranking official charged with food distribution. Joseph tests them by planting a cup in the bag of one of his brothers, and when the brothers demonstrate that they have erred in abandoning their long-lost brother, Joseph reveals his identity, and after they demonstrate remorse, he forgives them and reunites with his family and brings them to Egypt. With several notable exceptions, which I won't go into, scholarship on the Quran's Joseph chapter and its commentary has primarily been concerned with the Islamic account's relationship with the Hebrew Bible and Jewish interpretation, the Midrash, and the intertextual interplay between the Islamic and Jewish interpretive traditions. As far as I know, no one has written on Shi'i allegorizing interpretations of Surat Yusuf, such as that we find in the Ismaili and Nusayri traditions. Allegoresis can be defined as the interpretation of a narrative as allegorical when it is not commonly understood to have been written as an allegory. For streams of Islam in which allegoresis occupies a crucial role, the Quranic story of Joseph offers a special interpretive opportunity. Most references to prophets in the Quran are comments which allude to the story of the prophets. Indeed, much of the scholastic tafsir interpretive tradition serves to provide narrative and historical context for God's comments about these prophets. In Ismailism, when authors such as al-Qadi and al-Yaman and Jaʻfar ibn Mansur al-Yaman offer a ta'wil of a prophetic narrative, they inevitably draw on exotericist history in order to do so. Likewise, do the Nusayris refer to exterior accounts before they reveal the inner truth behind the stories of ancient prophets. But conversely, for the Joseph story, it is God's speech itself which provides the authors of ta'wil the material. If this were not reason enough for the Ismaili missionaries and Nusayri sages, several verses in the chapter refer to ta'wil explicitly. In 4 verses, God refers to teaching Joseph the ta'wil of ahadith, the ta'wil of reports or events, or dreams perhaps, or the ta'wil of his ru'ya, of his dream visions. It is then not surprising that although verse-by-verse commentary is uncommon in both the Ismaili and Nusayri doctrinal traditions, both produced nearly verse-by-verse commentaries on Surat Yusuf. In the following paragraphs, I consider commentaries in 2 such sources, the Nusayri treatise al-Risala al-Yusufiyya, the Joseph Epistle, composed in the late 10th century by the Nusayri savant al-Fath al-Baghdadi, and the Kitab al-fara'id wa-hudud by the 10th century Ismaili missionary Jaʻfar ibn Mansur al-Yaman. The former epistle was included in the soon-to-be-published doctrinal treatise, the Manhaj al-Ilm wal-Bayan, the Path of Knowledge and Clarification that Mushik and I have completed. And the latter is still unpublished, although, well, yeah, it is still unpublished in manuscripts. It is my hope that comparing these 2 different esotericist allegorizing traditions will help illuminate their character in a way not possible by looking at each singly. I have to say I've never done comparison. It's just, I've never done something like this before. So this is kind of an experiment, and I'm still undecided if it's a good idea or not. So I'm not really suggesting any textual link between these 2 sources. I'm just comparing them, but they are sort of nearly, written in more or less the same period or similar period. And, it's an interesting exercise, let's put it that way. So preliminaries, a brief summary of Nusayri's doctrines. So I think I'm safe in assuming that while this audience today has some familiarity with Ismailism's doctrines and history, that you are largely unfamiliar with Nusayrism's doctrines. So the following paragraphs offer a brief summary that will help understand al-Baghdadi's reading of the Joseph story. The most distinctive and important aspect of Nusayrism is their conception of theology proper, meaning the nature of divinity, the nature of God, a topic on which the Nusayri sages expand on at great length. And the Manhaj al-Ilm is 420 pages, a good 300 of those 420 are really about the Godhead. The Nusairīs hold that the Godhead exists in three parts. The first and highest of these is the ma'na, the meaning, which is personified in the Prophet's cousin Ali. The ma'na is the abstract and distant high God, which is also referred to with a negative theology. The ma'na is beyond definition. He is beyond description. He is beyond sensual perception. He is beyond language. Second, the ism, or name, which is personified as the Prophet Muhammad. The ism serves as a medial position. It exists as the external form of the ma'na. The Nusairi sages often state that the interior of the ism is the ma'na, and the exterior of the ma'na is the ism. The ism is intrinsically linked to the ma'na. The two should not be considered, but the two should not be conceived as a unity. However, the ma'na and ism should also not be considered as distinct. They are not in continuous connection, nor are they separate. La muttasil wa la munfasil. The relationship between the ma'na and ism was sufficiently subtle that the sages debated whether it is useful to conceive of the ism as created from the light of the ma'na, like beams of light from the sun, an image intended to demonstrate that they're extremely closely connected, but yet somehow distinct. But then this raised the issue, problematic for several sages, that the light not be conceived as possessing an independent ontology, and so this formulation was rejected by some. Unlike the ma'na, which is beyond place or space, the ism can be located in a place, fil makan, which the sages hold is crucial for its role as being the object of worship. Thus, the believers should direct their prayers to the ism, while at the same time recognizing that the ism is actually the exterior of the ma'na. The third aspect of divinity is the bab, or gate, which manifests as Salman al-Farisi, a companion of the Prophet. The bab is the most accessible, immediate form of divinity. Similar to the ma'na and ism, the ism and bab are described as in a dialectic relationship. Just as the ism represents the external form of the ma'na, so too does the bab represent the outward form of the ism. This conception of divinity was Nusair's response to the problem of rectifying the conception of God, who on the one hand utterly transcends this lower world of matter, and on the other is immanent and accessible to the faithful. Despite, or perhaps because of, this complex triadic conception, the Nusairi sages never cease reminding their flock that God is a unity. There is one God and only one, and a correct understanding of God confirms his essential unity from his multiple forms. The importance of this point was such that the Nusairis referred to themselves as the wa-hudud, the Unitarians, or those who conceive of God as one. While this is obviously important for all monotheists, its importance for Nusairis is perhaps amplified by the diversity of forms their conception of God's unicity entails. Below the Bab is an elaborate hierarchy of luminous human stations that are also divine, or perhaps divinely guided. From the light of the Bab are created 5 yatims, or item, unique ones, or orphans, who were personified in the period of Ali as his companions, al-Miqdad, Abu Dharr al-Ansari, and Najashi and Kanbar. These figures are treated as quasi-demiurges. It is the item who actually create the material world. But somehow they are material themselves. They're not totally without matter, unlike Ali, for example. Below the item are the luminous worldly stations of humans in the heavenly realms, each given a technical term. You can see here I've got up there nukabat, nujabat, mukhtasun, mukhlisun, mumtahinun. I won't translate all these because I'm not, they all more or less mean the noble or pure ones or tested ones. This concern with maintaining an abstract high God, which is too sublime to be qualified, but from which emerged other supernal immaterial entities, which in turn created the sublunar world, including humanity, is familiar to other near contemporary forms of Shi'ism, such as Ismailism, of course. It ultimately derives from the Neoplatonic philosophical tradition of Plotinus that had considerable influence from late antiquity to the Renaissance. The Nusairi's particular rendition, in particular, the elaborate spiritual hierarchy on earth, which mirrors supernal metaphysical patterns, is in essence similar to Ismaili cosmogony and hierohistory, with the major difference being that in Nusayrism, a significant portion of this great chain of being are not divinely guided humans, but visible manifestations or projections of divinity, which, at least at the upper end of the hierarchy, at times appear in visions, but are immaterial. To restate this more simply, Ali, or al-Ali, the High One, can be seen, but he did not have a body in Nusayrism. One last piece of the theological puzzle must be related to appreciate some of the Quran interpretation I discussed below. In the description above, I wrote that Ma'na, Ism, and Bab were personified in the human forms of Ali, Muhammad, and Salman. This is true, but it is important to note that in different periods, they also appear in other historical personae. The Nusayris call these different periods kubab, or domes, which is similar to the Ismaili sense of Dawr Adwar, or hiero-historical cycles. At the lower material ends of the hierarchy of ranks, the Nusayris use the term shirts, hawamis, for the different bodies of souls would wear in these different periods. So a soul will wear a shirt. But when different manifestations of God appeared, rather than material shirts, the Nusayris described them as imaginal forms, sur mathaliya, of the Ma'na and Ism. So that, for example, in the initial period, they appeared as Abel, the Ma'na, Adam, the Ism, and in our period as Joseph, the Ma'na, and Jacob, the Ism, and later Simon Peter, the Ma'na, and Jesus, the Ism. So you can see these are consistent in that they're reversals. In other words, one normally thinks of Jesus as obviously higher than Simon Peter, but in Nusayrism, they switch them. And this reversal is a kind of, I would call it a kind of guiding principle in a lot of aspects of Nusayri theology, some of which I'll touch on. This is the point where if I was teaching, I would say, are there any questions? But I'm going to march on, though. Oops. Okay, so the stories. So I'm going to start with the Nusayri Risala Yusufiyya by Baghdadi. So much of the account of Risala al-Yusufiyya transfigures the story of Joseph into an interior dialogue with edifying images between the different manifestations of the deity, an interior conversation between God's various manifestations. Say this more simply, different aspects of God are the characters in this drama. Parts of the chapter also show the connection between God and the hierarchy of ranks of believers, the role of knowledge as a path for liberation, to escape reincarnation, and to escape the prison of this material world and climb the ranks of the divine hierarchy. In the allegory, the cast of characters is as follows. The divine triad is represented by Joseph, who is the Ma'na, or more specifically, an imaginal form of Ali. Jacob is the Ism, and Zulaykha the Bab. Joseph's 11 brothers, like the 11 Imams who descended from Ali, are also manifestations of the Ism. He doesn't really work this out. It's a comment, but I just thought I'd mention it. The traveling merchants who rescue Joseph and sell him to Al-Aziz are the Nukabat, the high-ranking divinely guided humans in the hierarchy under the Bab and Item. When the Quran refers to Joseph's brothers' plot to kill Joseph, it is explained that by killing, what is meant is knowledge, i.e. seeking knowledge, i.e. the brother Imams kill, i.e. recognize Joseph's true stature as the Ma'na. So they're not doing anything wrong in the story. The brothers, these Imams are the Isms, the brothers, and they're, when the Quran says they're plotting to kill their brother, they're recognizing his that he is the Ma'na. But then one of the brothers says, "Do not kill him, rather throw him in the well." This reflects this brother's recognition that there is doubt among the believers in Joseph's status as the Ma'na, and they are not ready to know the truth directly. To convince the believers, the Ma'na feigns weakness. The well refers to the need for the Ma'na to go into occultation, hiding, and to appear as weak. At various historical moments, the commentator comments, the Ma'na must appear to adopt such a posture to have the necessary effect on the believers. So in other words, the story has been shifted so that it's supposed to the brothers coming off badly, is plotting, they're actually doing this as a performance to edify the believers. When Zulaykha attempts to seduce Joseph, this symbolizes the Bab attempting to unite with the Ma'ana without the mediation of the Ism. Her locking all the gates represents the Bab wanting to exclusive access to the Ma'ana. In other words, she's preventing the other gates from getting access. When the Quran says that she wanted him, this means that the Bab desired to attain knowledge without recourse of the intermediary, the Ism. When the Quran says that he wanted her, as it does, this is interpreted to mean that the Ma'ana wanted to guide the Bab to the Ism, to teach the Bab that this is the proper site from which to seek knowledge. And an interesting reversal, instead of Joseph declaring, "O Lord, Rabbi," the prison, the prison is preferable to, and the rest of the verse continues. So this is a key verse where after Joseph is accused of attacking Zulaykha, he even though he's innocent, he says prison is preferable to being in the situation in verse 33. So al-Baghdadi reads this not as Rabbi Sijin, but Rabb Sijin, master of the prison, and which is a way of the Quran refers to the Ma'ana, who's the ultimate master of this world. So in Nusayri sources, this world is depicted as a prison. So this is quite a rereading of that phrase. In the story's denouement, when the brothers finally recognize Joseph after his ruse with the chalice planted in Benjamin's bag, this is taken as a demonstration of the full recognition of the unicity of the three aspects of the Godhead, the Ma'ana, Ism, and Bab. So the brothers, so this is a sort of, in a way, it's a kind of performance put on by different aspects of the Godhead as a teaching tool. So even more pointed is the role of the qamis, the shirt, in the story. In Nusayrism, as I mentioned, the qamis is a technical term for the human body, which a soul wears and discards over different incarnations, over multiple, stages of reincarnation. In the Joseph story, the brothers place blood on Joseph's shirt to show that their father had been eaten by a wolf. For al-Baghdadi, the Quran's reference to the lying blood on the shirt confirms the doctrine that as the Ma'ana, Joseph is without body, and thus any reference to him wearing a shirt is false. Similarly, the theme of Kaid, strategic dissimulation, an important trope in the chapter, provides material for the Nusayri's Docetism, the sense that things are not as they appear. So Docetism is this idea that the word comes from the idea that that Christ could appear to have a body but not actually have one, which is one of the positions that was rejected by Orthodox Christianity, but central to Nusayrism. Thus, Joseph, the man, affects weakness, as this is what this period calls for. The Bab's transgression in attempting to unite with the man without the mediation of the Ism likewise illustrates the proper relationship between the divine triad, an understanding necessary for the believer to have a chance at salvation. And the brothers plotting to kill Joseph is, in its true sense, the Isms being fed knowledge by the Ma'ana, only to be interrupted by the brother again, by another brother, because of the realization of the spiritual need of the flock. So we'll come back to this at the end, but now let us turn to Jaʿfar bin Mansur al-Yaman's Ta'wil. So again, he thrived around mid-10th century, and this is from his Kitab al-fara'id, this verse-by-verse commentary. So the cast for Jaʿfar is rather different. The Joseph story in the Kitab al-fara'id is narrated as follows. The story begins with Jacob, the Imam of the age, who is without a hujjah, a legatee. I mentioned hujjah also because this is one of the reasons that I think Madelung dated this Kitab al-Fara'id as quite early. He thinks it probably was composed during the time of the Mahdi, so very early 10th century, because later on, the term hujjah would be, wasi was a more common term as legatee in the Ismaili tradition. That's one of the reasons, but there's others. So Jacob is awaiting a sign from God as to who his hujjah is to be, which comes in the form of Joseph's dream. Veridical dreams, the narrator explains, being the first sign of prophecy. When Joseph's brothers discover their father's intentions to name Joseph as their legatee, as his legatee, they are overcome with jealousy. The Qur'an declares that they designed either to kill Joseph or to banish him from the land. This is code, Jaफ़ar explains, for claims that Joseph is deficient in knowledge and that he is dominated by his whims. This is the way the brothers understand it. They plot to cast him out into the land. It is explained that land is a common code word for dawah. The shirt which is stained with blood is a metaphor for his madhab school, and the blood a metaphor for doubt. And the well in which he is thrown is a metaphor for a land in which the exotericists rule according to the power of their tongues and oppressing people of truth. So, and when the text refers to the merchants who pick him up, this means those traditionists with their doctrines of the exterior. So to sort of make this simpler, with Jaफ़ar, the way he's explaining this account is that his brothers, these other da'is, cast Joseph, who in their own mind is unprepared. His powers of argumentation are not strong enough to withstand the position he's placed in, and they cast him out in order to proselytize, knowing he's going to fail. So it's kind of like they send him out on this kind of doomed mission. And his brothers were attempting to show their father that he had fallen short in his ability to carry out what is necessary to be the hujjah. So they impugn him as one who will inspire doubt in their school. And the word used, this is another word, the word used for their for school here is madhab. So at this moment, Jaफ़ar is using madhab for the Ismaili, what he would later call the Ismaili dawah. But here it's the madhab, the sort of path, which is an interesting choice. By being unable to hold forth arguments against his opponents. So that their intention is to place Joseph at the bottom of the hierarchy of da'is, in another site where the people of exterior sense are dominant. His brothers think that by so doing, one of them, rather than Joseph, will be designated as Jacob's hujjah. What the brothers failed to realize, according to the ta'wil, was that Jacob had informed Joseph to keep his special knowledge secret. So the reason he wasn't able to argue effectively is not from incapacity, Jaफ़ar explains, but rather he's keeping the secret. And that's a theme that's a theme that runs through ta'wil, but it runs through the Joseph story interpretation. Most importantly, the narrator explains, they misappreciate the fact that it's not their father who chose the legatee, who chose the hujjah, but God. So this was not a choice. This was foreordained. When the merchants who take Joseph from the well do engage Joseph in argument, they immediately recognize that he possesses the speech of the true imams. They are persuaded and become his acolytes and convert to his madhab, his school. Joseph's eventual adoption by Al-Aziz and his wife is taken to connote, we will adopt him in our madhab, and perhaps we will learn the truth from him. Aziz's wife is taken to represent Al-Aziz's minister. So Zulaykha's attempt at seduction is the minister's attempt to gain secret knowledge improperly from Joseph. This is rejected by Joseph on the grounds that his patron Aziz is, in fact, a depositary imam, so a mustawda imam, who holds the truth for him on a temporary basis until Joseph is ready to ascend to the imamate. And it is improper for him to give knowledge to the minister when he remains under his patron in rank. For Joseph to step outside and give knowledge would be to transgress the mission, his status in the mission. When Zulaykha rips his shirt from behind, this is the minister's attempt to gain the special knowledge. Joseph's refusal represents his keeping the secret of the madhab. And when Zulaykha hosts the banquet for the city of women, this symbolizes a grand debate where Joseph is asked questions of doctrine from those who are masters of argumentation. So these are specialists in jadal, in debates. And their cutting their hands symbolizes their inability to maintain their arguments of their various madhabs, while Joseph demonstrates the truth of his madhab. Eventually, the depository imam relinquishes the imamate to Joseph, entrusting him with the storehouse of special knowledge, the food representing knowledge. All doubts having been dispelled, the brothers eventually reconcile with Joseph and recognize that he is Jacob's hujjah, his legatee. And most importantly, they appreciate the fact that it is not Jacob who chose him, but God. Jaʻfar's account is a story of jealousy, communal betrayal, but ultimately patience and reconciliation, as Joseph's brothers eventually accept him as Jacob's true hujjah. So just to talk about some similarities and differences, I'm not going to describe or give examples of the different exegetical techniques employed just because I don't think it presents very well, but I at least wanted to mention them. And for those of you who've read other esoteric literatures, I think that you will find these familiar. And Orkhan certainly will from his work on other esoteric traditions. So number parallelism based on number of letters in a word, inversion of dominant narratives, parallelism across periods, hermeneutical meta-comments, personalization, ritual and themes become personal figures. So one finds these in both Nusayri sources and Ismaili sources and in the Joseph story interpretations. Thematically, some shared themes include crypticism, by which I simply mean that the guiding principle that both Nusayri and Ismaili interpretation, that the Qur'an should be interpreted cryptically as having a hidden sense. Both authors offer hermeneutical asides that make this explicit. So thus, for example, in reference to Qur'an 12:6, God will prefer you and teach you the interpretation of events. Al-Baghdadi notes that this indicates that the Qur'an speaks in indirect cryptic speech, al-tariqat tablis wa istitar. He interprets the phrase the Qur'an was sent down to mean Isma'i ya jara, listen, O neighbor, addressed to a female, an idiomatic expression in classical Arabic that means that the coming lines will be related in cryptic indirect speech. Similarly, a core aspect of Jaʻfar's interpretation, which he repeats frequently, is the priority of the batin, the hidden sense, over the zahir, the exterior, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Other shared themes include the importance of only disclosing the saving knowledge to those appropriate, and the related theme of hierarchy, and the error of transgressing one's rank. Indeed, these themes are so omnipresent that it is impossible to overstate their importance. So the differences, and these are, I think, more interesting, at least more interesting to me to think about the differences for what it's worth. For the Nusayris, I would say a distinctive guiding principle is what one could call, following Henry Corbin, a rather extreme version of the docetic imagination. That's Corbin's phrase, the docetic imagination. By this, I mean that it's not just that there's an interior sense to the outward reality of scripture and realia. Rather, quite often, the hidden truth is actually the opposite of things as they appear. Thus, the hidden sense of the brothers' plot to kill Joseph is actually their properly seeking knowledge. It's an inversion. Killing is a metaphor for seeking knowledge. The rereading of the Quranic phrase, my Lord, prison, as Lord of the prison, encapsulates the Gnostic view of the Nusayris that this material world is not just something to be tolerated or transformed, rather it is something to be escaped. It was thus politically quietist. The Nusayris were politically quietist in this period, but not in the manner of the Sunni or Twelver ulama, who still find in this world the materials for redemption. Rather, for the Nusayris, it is the total focus on the correct understanding of this material world as beyond redemption, that one can begin to ascend up the ranks towards spiritual union with the Godhead and escape reincarnation in this material world. So I didn't touch on this, but for the Nusayris, they believe in tanasukh, reincarnation, and if you're bad, you reincarnate into lower and lower forms of material, the material world of animals, minerals, etc. So just to underline this, when I say Gnostic, I mean, there's a sense that this world's, a very dark place. In classical Gnosticism, the demiurge who creates the world is a wicked being. There's not a lot of evidence of that. As I said, the item created this material world, so they don't quite go that far, but they go quite a bit further than other esotericist groups in sort of making one feel like this really is. The metaphor, one quotation from the Manhaj, they describe this world as a corpse, which is almost word for word identical to a Manichaean source, actually, which they may have borrowed from directly. And the other thing I'll say about the inversion, to give you another example of just how they reverse things. So in their, elsewhere in the Manhaj, the Kharijite who assassinated Abdurrahman ibn Muljam is lionized. He's playing a part of this historical drama. So this character, who's obviously has a very bad reputation for the Shia generally, is kind of inverted. Similarly, Ashura in the Nusayri ritual is a happy celebration day, not a sad day. So inversion is one of their core aspect of the tradition. So if Docetism, the idea that this world is false and fetid, is the core guiding principle of Nusayri doctrine that informs its exegesis, Ismaili Ta'wil, in contrast, is focused on the rectification of the missionaries. I was going to pick one element that distinguishes it from other esoteric traditions. It's this focus on the missionaries and their how to treat their how to confront misbehavior specifically. It's tempting to try to link the figure of Joseph, cast out in a sea of hostile debaters, tested by duplicitous missionaries in need of rectification, to the events on the ground at the beginning of the Fatima Dawah and the various schisms and betrayals of some of the well-known missionaries, so artfully described by Halm, Daftari, Hamdani, and others. But it seems to me that when trying to forge any social unit, as the Ismailis are trying to do, such themes are universal. One is always struggling to encourage the recalcitrant to toe the line. It is its appeal, which transcends the moment of its composition, that made these sources classics that would persist for over a millennium. So I would just say, it's fun to try to link these abstract tales to particular moments, and they emerged from those historical moments. So I don't think it's another exercise, but I would just kind of highlight the point is that the reason that they remain relevant after the immediacies on the ground are forgotten is that they're drawing on something which is a universal. In other words, the need for, in this case, communal rectification and not rebelling and revolting and creating schism. So with that, I'm going to look forward to your questions, and thank you for your attention. And I'll turn it back to you, Orkhan, I guess.
Thank you very much, David, for this stimulating talk. And I think it is very important to bring the attention on the diversity of approaches to the Quranic exegesis, because mainly when we mention it, not usually what comes to mind when Quranic exegesis is mentioned is Sunni approaches to interpretation of the Quran. And here, listening to you, what comes to my mind, I don't know if you agree with that or not, that we have almost more differences between different branches of Shi'i interpretations than between Shia and Sunni
Yes,
interpretations of
they're
Quran.
extremely different. That's what's, I mean, when I started, and actually that was one of the concerns I had that was haunting my choice, was this choice being in some ways defined by almost like Sunni, like sort of, you know, their class close together, and I'm following that. But then so I'm not, you know, I'm still undecided about this as a project, you know what I mean, for that reason. But what I think that is fair, and I'm not sure if Fârès is here, but he would have something to say about this because he is better at drawing on the connections than I am. I tend to sort of, you know, so yeah, anyway, that's kind of where I am. But I agree that what this brings out, and I was playing with showing a picture of a Rothko painting to talk about like how the colors that are very close together, you know, when they're put on the thing, all of a sudden you see they're quite different, you know. So in a way, it's like that. When you have some things that are shared, it allows you to see how radically different, in fact, these different esotericist groups are. So I agree. Yeah.
And I had a number of questions. I said, yes, you mentioned Fârès. I also regret very much. And unfortunately, I think he didn't manage today. He must have had some unexpected circumstance. Of course, it would be very valuable to hear his input, given also his recent publication of the book of Kitab al-Kashf of Jaफ़ar ibn Mansur al-Yaman. I have a few questions, you know, just out of my very superficial familiarity with Nusayri doctrine also. What I found interesting is that Zulaykha is attributed the status of Bab.
Yeah.
And Bab is apparently is a high
Very high
position, right? It's the access to esoteric knowledge.
Yeah.
Is there any development on that? Is it? I even thought maybe it is somehow connected to this, you know, to the image of beloved in Persian poetry, when the woman is taken as a way, the beauty, female beauty, is a way of access to divine knowledge.
I wouldn't be surprised. There's a lot of flow. There's some Sufi topoi in the Manhaj, and so I would, you know, I mean, I haven't seen Zulaykha mentioned in Nusayrism except for this commentary, you know, except for this commentary on Surat Yusuf, but they're not. They're. I mean, so Barasher and is quite right when he refers to the synchronistic. So they pick up and adopt as their approach from everywhere, from Zoroastrian sources, from Manichaean sources, from Sufi sources, from Sunni sources, as well as from 12 or Shiite, which is the dominant thing one finds. But yeah, it is interesting. I mean, but I haven't seen it elaborated other than this account.
Right.
But I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Yeah. And perhaps the last one from me, not to monopolize the discussion, is that I was thinking about the authority to interpret the Quran. That we know that, well, in Sunnism, any scholar can interpret the Quran. In Shi'ism, the right and authority to interpret the Quran is normally connected with the imams.
Yeah.
In Twelver Shi'ism, in Ismailism, and also I don't know about Nusayrism, how it
It's similar
is
to,
pictured
yeah,
there.
I think, yeah. Basically, the basic premise reminds me a bit of Ismailism, and that true knowledge flows down the hierarchy, and so you are not able. Basically, everything you know from your teacher, and your teacher is sort of, you know, part of a link, a sabab, going back all the way up to, but ultimately to Ali, to the man, you know. So it's, I would say that no, there's no opportunity for independent, you know, sort of engagement. It's always channeled as something that's flowing down from ultimately from God. The interpretation is coming from divinity, because these upper figures are divine.
They kind of transmitted from the master to disciple,
yes.
or
There's spiritual adoption. It's abuwa. It's very similar to Ismailism. So the idea is you're reared. When you convert, you're kind of adopted. Your master is your parents. Are your parents, and yeah. So it's in that way quite similar. I mean, I think of it as similar to Ismailism, but I also read the Manhaj of the Sufi in Egypt, and he said it's very similar to Sufism too for him. Some aspects of it. Yeah. I thank you very much for attending. Yes,
thank you very much, David, for your wonderful talk. And many thanks to everyone who joined us for this talk today. And also thanks to everyone who supported this lecture behind the scenes, our IT department, Department of Communications and Development, and special thanks to Sushil Gokarokonda, our marketing and communications manager, and of course to Nushin Premji, projects and events coordinator. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.
And thank you.